The first time I properly bought groceries for myself, I remember feeling the weight of the bags in my arms. I came home, put the bags on the floor, and pulled out the carrots and the cookies, the garlic and the salad dressing, and I stacked them in the cupboards until they were full. That night I woke up around 1 a.m., wondering if buying those groceries had been a particularly vivid dream. So I walked out to the kitchen and opened the cupboard, almost expecting it to be empty. The array of colours and packaging that jumped out at me filled me half with a sense of pride, but also fear. I sat on the ground in the middle of the night and just stared at all the food that I was responsible for. That was 6 years ago. I was 27 years old and beginning to recover from an eating disorder. Since then, I've devoted my life to helping people overcome a disease that has the highest mortality rate of any mental illness. In 2017, I started Recovered Living to help bridge the massive gap that happens in eating disorder treatment all over the world. In the past 2 years, I've spent over 300 days living in 6 different countries, living with people who are in recovery. I call these live-ins. The people that I help are students, parents, partners, professionals, just like you and I. The rest of the time, I get to work online with people, helping them recover too. There is a gaping misperception out there that a serious eating disorder looks like what we see in the media. The truth is, there are 8 different eating disorder diagnoses. Only one of them has a criteria relating to weight. All of them kill. I want to show you what my eating disorder looked like. I first became sick when I was an elite athlete as a teenager. By the time I was 18, I'd twice been admitted to an inpatient ward in Australia. Each time I returned home, I was more stable, but I had no idea of what I needed to do in order to fully recover. So for the next 9 years, I became a high-functioning individual with an eating disorder. I competed on the world stage. I had a full-time job. I didn't even really think I was sick. I still did funky things with food and exercise. I was just better at hiding it. See, my body was at a healthy weight, but my mind was still stuck in an eating disordered psychology. My thoughts were dominated by what I would eat, when I could exercise, and if my body was changing. Nobody knew. This photo was taken when I was 27 years old. A few weeks later, I was unable to work. I'd pushed away most of the people that cared about me, and I was living with my best friend's parents because I couldn't look after myself. This time, I sought treatment in New Zealand. After hearing my story, they told me that my eating disorder, at 14 years duration, was considered chronic, and I should expect to never fully recover. Desperate for inspiration, I searched online and found this thing called residential treatment, different to a hospital. I could go there and learn how to recover, and the people who would teach me would be recovered themselves. Best of all, they had this thing called a step-down program, which started at 24/7 care and went all the way through to a couple of hours a week. I couldn't find anything this comprehensive, this specialized, or this specific anywhere but America. So I phoned this facility up and I said, "Hey, I've been told that I'm chronic and I'll never recover. What do you think?" The woman on the other end of the phone said, "Kristie, I think you should come and see us." She said, "It doesn't matter how long you've been sick. It doesn't matter how many times you've tried to recover." She said, "What matters is the decision you make in this moment, because every decision you make will either take you closer to your eating disorder or closer to recovery." This was the first time anyone had ever told me that I could actually recover from an eating disorder. And I felt this bubble of hope beginning to well up inside me. So I said to this wonderful woman, I said, "Can you tell me how much it costs?" She said, "Absolutely, it's $1,200 US. And I naively said, "Oh, is that like $1,200 a month?" And she said, "No. Kristie, that's $1,200 US a day." And I said to her, "I'm sorry." I said, I just can't. And I couldn't live with my eating disorder anymore, because at this point, I was so depressed, I was struggling to get through a single day, let alone imagine a future for myself. So I said to my parents, I said, hey, I found this place that I think can help. And I was fortunate enough that they were willing and able to put together the money for me to go and get 6 weeks of residential treatment in America. So I flew to California with this wild and desperate hope that maybe somebody could help. I thought recovering was going to be hard. It was harder. For the first month, I went a little bit crazy. I tried to quit 50 times a day, and the only thing that kept me there was knowing the life that I'd go back to, and it was not a life that I was willing to live. After a little while, I went to the clinical director, and I said, hey, Nora, this is going to take a little longer than 6 weeks, isn't it? She put her hand on my knee, looked me right in the eye. She said, about 6 months, sweetheart. I went and looked at my personal savings. I had $40,000, everything I had. That was enough for about 3 weeks of treatment. Never had so much money felt like so little. My parents could see that I had a real shot at recovering, so together we pulled our finances and came up with enough for 7 months of treatment. I'm recovered today. To clarify, thank you. To clarify, it's not like I walked out of treatment and was just done with my eating disorder. I'd just taken the very first step in what is the marathon journey in recovery. When I flew home to rural New Zealand, I was met with a system that didn't have the resources to support me. I was now deemed too well by the Ministry of Health to qualify for treatment, so they told me to come back when my eating disorder did. I searched around for a private therapist that specialised in eating disorders. The nearest person I could find was 5 hours drive away. It wasn't going to work. So I found a therapist who agreed to work with me online. A dietitian in America said she could Skype, and at meals I would FaceTime with my friends from treatment, and we would support each other. For the next few months, this was my team. I could have been on the moon, and provided I had internet access, I was going to be okay. While I was in America, people came for treatment from all over the world. Most of them didn't have health insurance to support the cost of this. Some people remortgaged their homes. Other people used their kids' inheritance. Some people died. In the current economy, a month of eating disorder treatment in America will cost a New Zealander a little over $50,000. An ideal treatment program would be about 6 months for a full course of care. All up, a New Zealander could be looking at $250,000. But finances aren't the only issue for people that have an eating disorder, and New Zealand isn't the only country affected. In Australia, in 2011, more people died of an eating disorder than the annual road death toll. In 2012, America lost 34,000 people to breast cancer. They lost 300,000 to eating disorders. In England, 60% of people had to wait more than 6 months for a diagnosis or treatment. If you rang up your mechanic and said to him, hey, my car's not driving right, and he said, I'm sorry to hear that, can you bring it in 6 months? You'd find another mechanic. But what happens when every mechanic in your country says that? In Ireland, 200,000 people have an eating disorder. The number of beds available to treat them is 3. This is what we know from statistics gathered around 2011. We just don't have more recent research along this line of inquiry. Let's look at what this problem looks like when it's represented visually. In the UK, there's 67 million people. Worldwide, the number of people estimated to have an eating disorder, 70 million. When we take these 70 million people and break down what happens to them, this is what it looks like. Without treatment, 20% of people with eating disorders will die. So let's say you have an eating disorder. You're exercising a couple of hours a day, eating healthy. Everyone's telling you how resilient you are and how great you look. Worldwide, millions of people are not getting the help they need because they don't think they're sick enough. If you wake up in the morning and have a problem with food or your body, you deserve dedicated, specialized care. But only 10% of people with an eating disorder are seeking help. If you are in the 10%, you now have just a 35% chance of getting specialized treatment. When you need surgery, you go to a surgeon, not a seamstress. By sending people with eating disorders to people that don't have specialized training, we're putting Band-Aids on bullet wounds. People are bleeding out. If you are in this 35% that get specialized treatment, you now have just a 20% chance of getting the length and the intensity of care you require. That's like going to a doctor for an infection and they just give you 50% of the antibiotics. If you don't have access to the amount of antibiotics you need, this could kill you. If you don't have access to the amount of eating disorder treatment that you need, it can kill you too. So if you are in the 10% that seek help, the 35% that get specialized care, and the 20% of those that get the length and intensity of treatment they require, you now have a 70% chance of fully recovering in 2 to 10 years. When we give people the care they need to recover, most of them do. Most of them aren't getting that care. The people with eating disorders who scare me the most are not the ones we see in the media. The people who scare me the most are the people with jobs and partners and families, because no one knows they're sick. These people break my heart, because no one is telling them they can recover fully, and no one is helping them complete the job. I want to tell you about a client of mine. She's 40 years old in America. She has a husband and 2 children. And she's had an eating disorder for over 20 years. We worked online together for a little over a year before she said, "Can you come and do a live-in with me?" So I packed my bags, flew out to America, and for 6 weeks became a part of her family. The first morning, I wake up, walk into the kitchen, the dogs need to be let out, the kids' lunches are being made, the kids are getting ready for school, the dishwasher's going, the washing machine's humming, there's 1,000 things happening, and it's complete chaos. I was there for a reason, so I figured I'd help her out, so I push over the piece of paper on the counter that has her meal plan written on it. And I stepped back and just watched what happened. For the first time, I began to understand why it was so difficult for this woman to eat her food. It was like there was a brick wall between her brain and the paper. Because intellectually, she knew she needed to eat. But practically, she had no idea how to prioritize and no idea how to cut through the thousands of eating disorder thoughts in her brain. We had a lot of conversations about how to put recovery first. And I said to her, when you wake up in the morning, the first thing I need you to do is grab a bowl and get breakfast. She goes, "What about the dogs?" And I said, "Well, kids can let her out." She says, "Well, who's going to make their lunches?" And I said, "Oh, you can do that just after breakfast." "Well, what about the washing?" I said, "You can do that just after breakfast." "Well, what about the dishwasher?" "Yep, you can run that after breakfast." "Well, what if there's something really important and urgent that I have to do right away?" "It's okay, you can do that just after breakfast." She goes, "Are you saying that the first thing I have to do in the morning is have breakfast?" I'm like, "Yeah." She goes, "Oh." This was hard for her to do because the way her eating disorder functioned was food came last on the list if it made it there at all. This client gained more traction in the month that I was there than in the entire year we had worked together. When it was time for me to go, she looked at me and she said, "I'm not ready." And we both knew it was true. So we designed a specialized online program just for her. The day after I left, we met 5 times a day: breakfast, snack, lunch, snack. She did dinner with her family, and then we'd meet right before she went to bed. Then we stepped it down to 4 times, then 3, 2, 1. Today, for the first time in over 20 years, this client is in recovery. She is going to do it. She will recover. I am 100% recovered from my eating disorder. I know this because you could offer me $1 million today and I wouldn't go back to it, because I'm not willing to trade the size of my life for the size of my body. In a way, I think I'm lucky that I had an eating disorder, because as a recovered woman, I have a better sense of myself, I have a better relationship with food, and I have a better relationship with my body, because I know what it's like not to have these things. To me, being fully recovered means being able to go to a party and not be scared about the food weeks in advance. It means choosing to have the pasta because I want it, not because I've earned it. And it means being able to wake up in the morning and enjoy the peace in my mind, rather than counting the calories that are on my mind. Partially recovering from an eating disorder is not being recovered. I always say to people, you can't be kind of pregnant. It's almost like taking a bird from a box and putting it into a cage. The bird has more room to fly, but it will never be truly free. I worked online for a little while with someone who was what I'd call partially recovered. She was high functioning, had a job, had a boyfriend. She called me one day from New York. We were Skyping, and I could tell she was super stressed about work. So I said to her, "Hey, what's going on with dinner?" And she looked like a deer in the headlights. And I thought to myself, well, we could talk about dinner for an hour, or we could just do dinner. So I said, "Hey, can you pick up your laptop, take me into the kitchen, and show me inside your fridge?" And that's when recovery got real for her, because inside her fridge there was a stick of butter and some lettuce. So I got her to take me around the rest of the kitchen. She showed me the pantry, the cupboards, the freezer, and I helped her cobble together a meal. While she was cooking it, I figured I'd grab my own and we could eat together. The next day she emailed me to say that had been the single most significant part of her entire recovery. She said, "Kristie, for years I've been talking about my eating disorder in therapy, but my eating disorder doesn't always show up in the therapy room." She said, "Last night it showed up in my apartment and you were there to help me navigate it." Today this woman has a husband and a 2-year-old little boy. Recovered is absolutely possible. The people that recover from an eating disorder are the ones who don't give up. They're the ones who get up. The people who recover are the ones who are willing to do whatever it takes, as long as it takes, until it's done. My vision is that people worldwide have access to eating disorder treatment. So I don't care where you live. I don't care how many times you tried to get better. I don't care if you think you're not sick enough, because you are. And I don't care if you think that you can't access support, because that is beginning to change. What I've created with Recovered Living, with online and live-in support, is an attempt to fulfill that vision. It is different. It adds another dimension to treatment options, and it helps fill the gap that we have in our current system. And it's something that I've seen personally save lives. Thank you.